It's that time of year when gardeners wonder what the autumn colour's going to be like this year. It needs steadily lowering temperatures and not too many strong winds if it's going to be really striking. But me, I'm still wrapped up and enamoured of the green in this grove of tree ferns. It's been a perfect year for them. I mean, plenty of rain. The shade of this old oak tree, they've done an absolute treat. It won't be long before I have to lag them for winter. But right now, I'm still enjoying them, and they're enjoying life too. As are the ferns underneath in this carpet here of evergreens and deciduous types. Evergreens like the hartstongue fern, with its long, strappy fronds of shiny lime green, and deciduous kinds like Dryopteris walliciana. Look closely at the midrib on the underside, and it's covered in black hairs, just like a sort of ferny gorilla. But while I'm still enjoying green foliage, it is time to think about spring flowers. Now, the one problem with spring bedding is you've got to get the old summer stuff out before it goes in. And these echiums, loving a mist, nigella, have gone over. They can be oiked out. A few of the seeds will fall in, but they'll come up next year, which I really don't mind. What I don't want to pull out, because I'm not one of those obsessively tidy gardeners, is these forget-me-nots, which have seeded themselves. They'll flower in spring. I might just as well enjoy them. But when you've got all that off, you can then lightly fork over the surface of the soil. But imagine all the rain that's come down during the summer. It's washed through all the goodness, all the nutrition. The plants that are going to go in here now need a bit of food. Nothing extravagant. Just a little sprinkling of pelleted poultry manure. A few handfuls. It'll fall down into those nooks and crannies. And come the spring, give them the wherewithal to grow really well. Now, when it comes to spring bedding, I don't mind confessing I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I love me wallflowers, tulips in between, pansies along the front. What could be better? Well, here they are. They don't look terribly prepossessing to start with. They do once you've put them in. And wallflowers are grown in nursery rows to be dug up and transplanted at this time of year. So you get them in clumps with no soil on their roots at all. You'd think they were going to die, but they won't. They're incredibly resilient. They don't mind the fact that all the soil's been washed off their roots. As long as you soak them overnight in a bucket of water, they'll come to no harm. Tease out the individuals, and don't worry that they look like this. You just need to get your trowel and then plant each one in its own hole. Now, these wallflowers will have been sown last May, transplanted in early summer, and then dug up now on the soil shaken from their roots to be sold. It seems odd until you remember that they're a brassica, member of the cabbage family, and you think of spring cabbages. You plant them in exactly the same way and then puddle them in. Of course, if they're a brassica, it also means that they get clubroot. So if you've got very acid soil where clubroot, that nasty fungus disease, is prevalent, then lime it a bit before you plant. Now, the reason I've left these wallflowers a good foot apart is not just to allow them room to grow, which of course it will, but also to plant tulips in between. But tulips can do with being planted a bit later, in November, to reduce the risk of tulip fire, and because they don't really start rooting until later in the year, and they may well rot. But what I can do is plant along the front these little beauties. Winter flowering pansies, which have a great recovery rate after frost, and this little viola called Magnifico. Now, I've grown this for 2 years. It's an absolute beauty. A new F1 hybrid, that's a first-generation cross, and I've grown it in pots and pans outside the back door. And right the way through the winter, it's been an absolute little belter. So I'm going to shove it along the front of this border here, just to give me the brightness and colour. They're lovely little smiley chaps, these, and they'll spread out to cover the soil during the course of the next month or two. Now, the one thing that's important with any kind of bedding, but particularly with spring bedding, is that you firm it in really well to make sure that the soil is in contact with the roots. And if you do get frosts over the next few weeks, they can lift that plant out, cause an air pocket to form around it, and the roots can dry. So if it does get frosted, just firm that earth back in with your fingers so that it's still in contact with the roots. Now, over the next few days, they're going to wilt and look a right old sight, but keep your cool and stay your hand, because they will pick up as soon as their root hairs start getting down into the soil and absorbing moisture. And they'll go down when there's a bit of a frost too, but again, they'll have a rapid recovery. Plant your tulips in November and look forward to a really good spring display. Now, when it comes to BBC Gardener of the Year competition, open only to amateurs, you've got to be a really good all-rounder. You need good garden design skills, good plant knowledge, plus a good garden of your own. Rachel de Thame's been to meet the second of our finalists.
Enchantment and mystery are words I'd use to describe this woodland paradise, which has all the hallmarks of a fertile imagination and a love of nature. It's the secluded garden hideaway of textile designer David Rosewarne, who's carved out this quiet spot only minutes from London's busy North Circular Road. Oh, David, the willow is such a focal point, isn't it? Has the garden always looked like this?
It hasn't. Obviously, the willow tree has always been here, but most of the garden underneath was in lawn, and then finally, about 3 years ago, got rid of the last piece of grass and substituted it with planting.
I love the way that you've got, even here, it is like a carpet, sort of Turkish carpet, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, the Times are really enjoying this sunny spot. It's like one of the few sunny spots in the garden, so we've planted it with thymes, with rosemary, with sages, so we've got those sort of smelly plants. I really enjoy the creeping jenny that rambles its way over the thyme. We've grown sempervivums in the pots because they don't need watering, they don't really need looking after. And they're also extremely decorative. They're sort of the patterning of the leaves is throughout the year. It's long-term planting.
And you've got some really good plants for height here as well, the maclea.
Yes, the maclea is one of my favourite plants. It's very statuesque. I love the shape of the leaves and the colouring of the underside of the leaves with very silvery white, blow about in the wind and create very nice effects.
Ah, now just around there I've spotted some water.
That's right, that's from a pond that we've created. It takes the water from off the roof and we reclaim all the house water.
What about recycling generally?
I'm very keen on that. The terrace itself is made from bricks that we've collected from out of skips. My seats over there are made from reclaimed timber.
Yeah, the seats are wonderful. Are they all your own design?
Yes, yes. I feel as though sort of seating is a very important part of the garden experience.
Now tell me, how did you go about the planting for this area under the willow tree?
Well, it's been very important to use plants that will survive the dryness, and I've also wanted to have plants that would give me long-term leaf colour, so I've chosen a lot of evergreen plants. I'm very excited by the wonderful sort of texture and patterning of the leaves. I mean, this heuchera is a wonderful example. My textile designing career has certainly influenced my choice of planting, and these wonderful shapes just look tremendous.
But having said that, you couldn't resist the fuchsias.
Yes, I think it's sort of quite nice to have a bit of vulgar every now and again. Also the brilliant pink geraniums behind them.
This is extraordinary. It's like something from The Hobbit.
Yes, it's a very important sort of part of the fantasy element to the garden. Started life as a den for my young son and slowly taken on a life of its own as we've added to it over the past few years. This is another lovely sort of cool seating area underneath the willow when it's hot in summertime. We sit around the table that my son Chris made.
That's beautiful. So what's this area of the garden?
This is the potager, and it's in another sunny area of the garden.
It's lovely. Do you grow mostly ornamental vegetables, or do you eat them as well?
I used to grow vegetables that you could eat, but they looked so pretty that it was always such a shame to pull them up. So this is just sort of for decoration only.
I notice you've got ruby chard.
It looks good and bright, strong colours when everything else is sort of fairly low-key.
And a gourd as well.
I'm growing those for the first time, and it'll be interesting to see what they turn out like.
It's lovely because it gives it some height as well.
Yes, exactly.
And this whole area has something of a feel of a cathedral. I think it's the Gothic arches that you've created.
That was sort of supposed to represent growth and soaring heavenwards, and I really sort of like the upward thrust of it all and the idea of them looking as though they're growing, even though they're just kind of woven twigs.
The landscape here, southeast of Utrecht, is typical of much of Holland. Cow pasture, flat as a billiard table, fringed in willows and little woods, and all contained in a grid of canals. We think of Holland as the headquarters of Europe's flower production industry, but strangely there's been no great tradition of private flower gardening here this century. In fact, internationally, Holland hasn't been much associated with garden making at all, since its great contribution to formal design in the late 17th century, which we felt across Britain from Hampton Court downwards. The typical Dutch front garden, with its neat lawn and conifers, is giving way to jam-packed assortments of hardy perennials and flowering shrubs. One of the inspirations behind the change has been the making of the garden at Walenburg. Valenburg's massive 13th century defence tower surveys the scene from a moated island, which you get to across a pair of oak bridges. The Counts van Linden have lived here for some 200 years, domesticating the tower and more recently adding this outbuilding with its classic Dutch stepped gable. The big surprise is the garden accompanying it. Not a typical Dutch garden, in fact, but a beautiful example of Sissinghurst-style romance, a formal design overlaid with cottagey planting. Up until last year, the garden was preserved in the Kahneman style for the Dutch Garden Foundation by designer Karin Stolker-Jacobsen. Obviously, they must have travelled quite a bit in England and been very inspired by English design.
Yes, they did. They went to England very often, and to Italy as well, and France, Germany. They travelled a lot.
Why do you think there was such a slow awakening to flower gardening in Holland?
In the 60s, I think there was a beginning of taking your holiday outside this country. We went abroad. We went to France and saw the gardens there and saw nature there. And we went to England.
And now suddenly it seems that everyone's making flower gardens.
Yes. Since then we moved on and we all were very interested, became very interested in gardens and in plants. And we now all are busy in our gardens. When you first come into this kitchen garden, in this time of the year you see the white of the roses and the blue of the delphiniums, and when you see it for the first time, it's like wow. It has a very special atmosphere with the rosa sneeuwwitje.
Iceberg to us.
Iceberg to you, and the delphiniums.
They're a beautiful strain, incredibly intense blue.
It's Volkerfrieden. It's a German variety. It's a very strong colour indeed.
And then quite soft planting all round.
Yes, very romantic, isn't it?
Very. And then you pass through into a really peaceful garden opposite.
Yes, the silent garden, or white garden it is called as well, because we have various white flowering plants and shrubs over there.
The tops of the golden elms are giving a welcome shot of contrasting colour to all the pinks and crimsons, the rambler and shrub roses concentrated in this area. Mostly these roses flower only once, but an assortment of China roses and floribundas with an appropriate flavour, like Catherine Zymart and Dainty Bess, have been cleverly worked in to keep some colour going through the rest of the summer. More modern roses also play their part in this sister enclosure. This is Constant Spry, floating its myrrh scent over the stone seat. And across the lawn, its globe shape is picked up by Raubritter, a rose with a good long season, and in turn echoing the pinks of pale willow herb and Rosamundi reflecting in the water. It makes an attractive combination, doesn't it, Karin, this sort of dreamy Dutch architecture and waterways with the exuberant English planting?
Yes, it does. There is a special atmosphere here. You feel it, well, most of the people do. They come here sometimes every year, sometimes after a few years they come back and want to see it again. And I feel it for 7 years now. I work here for 7 years and always it's there. You can feel it all the time.
If you want to be tiptoeing through the tulips or dallying through the daffodils, autumn is the time to plant spring bulbs. You don't have to plant daffs in small clumps in your lawn. Be imaginative and think about alternative ways.
If you have the space, bulbs can be used to create great drifts of colour. And why not create your own masterpiece? I call this one scrambled eggs. So why not use bulbs to light up your garden? So lighten up and have fun. Yoo-hoo! I am the Eggman, cuckoo, cuckoo.
This giant fried egg could be achieved on any scale. I just marked this out with canes to the shape and size. I planted the yolk with unsurpassable and the white with ice follies. These flower at the same time. Be careful not to use varieties that flower at different times.
A good rule of thumb is to have the bulbs 3 times their own depth. So the smaller the bulb, the shallower they can go. If you don't plant them deep enough, they may go blind, which means lots of foliage and very little flower. They need to go in by October at their best for daffodils because they do need their beauty sleep. Tulips can be left a little bit later. Now you can plant these in a number of different ways, a bulb planter, digging the turf off, but on this scale, I'm going to put them in trenches.
You can't make a giant fried egg without a few leftover shells. The problem is what to do with them.
I've turned mine into my nest egg, and as you can see, they make perfectly good containers, but it's all a question of scale. If you've got a smaller garden, you could make smaller nests, and you could use dwarf bulbs, like Tate or the tiny little midget, which would be perfect. There's bulbs for you, whatever the size of your garden. If you're planting a container that's going to be used in the garden, make sure it's got plenty of drainage holes. This colander obviously has, but you just do it in the same way. A bit of compost in the bottom. I'm going to put 2 layers of bulbs in here. I've put the tulips in at the greater depth, being the larger bulbs. A layer of compost. Then on the top, I'm going to put a layer of Little Witch Narcissi. These are much smaller bulbs, so they don't need to go in nearly so deep. And you can put that anywhere in your garden. You could put it in the cold frame. You could even bring it into the house in the spring. But if you haven't got a suitable container, just use a plastic pot with drainage holes, plant it up in the same way, and then plunge it into whatever container takes your fancy come the spring.
If you're planting up a container for indoors and it has no drainage holes, put some bulb fibre in when you're planting. This contains charcoal which sweetens the soil and stops it going rank.
If you wanted to really slap it on in the spring, how about these tulips in tulips? They're inspired by the famous red lips of Mae West. Salvador Dali designed a sofa in the shape of her red scarlet lips, so how about these in scarlet appledorn? If you're planting bulbs in grass, you have to think ahead. You have to remember you have to leave the foliage for at least 6 weeks before it dies down. And you don't have to put them into bunches either.
The leaves need to be left free to absorb sunlight energy so they can make flowers for next year. So remember to mow around the foliage. This is also the right time to feed them.
Bulbs always look good planted in the normal way in formal beds. I'm plunging these into these clay pots to make a formal spring bed, just in case.
I don't know how to follow that, except to say that it's been a very good year for sweet peas. These white ensign are still flowering their hats off and scenting the air. Up this wigwam of willow withies. I shall leave them in until the frost knocks them back. No reason why I shouldn't. Now, normally I sow them in spring. Most gardeners do. But this year I thought I'd do what the professional sweet pea growers do and sow them right now. The advantage of autumn sowing is that you get plants which are really well established when it comes to planting them out in spring. But are they going to be all right through the winter? You're probably thinking to yourself. Sweet peas are tough almost as old boots, and all they need is the protection of a cold frame. I'll show you in a minute. But to sow them at this time of year, don't bung them in little 3-inch pots. Give them a 5-inch job like this, which has got more compost in. They're going to be sitting in there for quite a while, and that'll give them the wherewithal to sustain themselves. Bit of crock in the bottom to cover the hole, and then fill up with peat-free compost. Lightly firm it at the top with your fingers, pat it level, then you can sow your seeds. First, you can pause for a glass of water, not to drink it. Look in the bottom. The sweet pea seeds have been soaking in there overnight. They've got a very, very tough, thick seed coat that takes a while to break down and allow the seed to germinate. By soaking them in water overnight, softens the seed coat, makes germination quicker. All you can do now is tip it away. Space them out over the surface of the compost so you can get about 7 seeds in this pot. That way they're not struggling too much and competing too much during the course of the winter. Spare ones back in there, and then you don't cover them, you push them down with a dibber or a pencil. Push the seeds down into the compost for between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. And for those of you gone metric, that's 1 to 2 centimetres. Just push in a label, and then it's ready to be watered in and go in the frame. One really good watering should do them for quite a while now. It's unlikely that they're going to bake and get dry in here. But use a can with a rose so you don't disturb the soil, and give each pot a really good soak so that water carries right the way down through the compost. Now, when it comes to protection, you really only need to lower the light, the frame lid with the glass in it, when it's frosty. When the weather's anything like reasonable, leave it open, give them plenty of air. You don't want them to grow fast, you want them to grow slowly, but the glass will just keep the frost off them, and they'll be fine until they're planted out next spring.
We're taking a fascinating look at the natural history of the British coastline next here on UKTV Gardens. Stay with us for another remarkable journey with Coast, coming up in just a few moments.